Hello. Let's talk about a transit that is about to slow the noise down and help us get a whole lot more intentional. Mercury enters Taurus on May 2nd and will remain there until May 17th. And when that happens, the mind becomes steadier, communication becomes more deliberate, and the collective energy shifts from fast reactions to grounded thinking. Mercury rules the mind, communication, perception, ideas, and the way we process information. Taurus rules stability, patience, money, values, security, and the physical world. So when you put them together, this is a transit of practical thinking, slower decision-making, and conversations that actually mean something. This is calm. This is intentional. This is grounded. Think. More thoughtful communication. A stronger desire for clarity, consistency, and follow-through. Decisions based on what feels solid, not just exciting. A deeper focus on money, priorities, self-worth, and long-term stability. This energy does not want to rush. It wants to build. It wants to make sure that what you're saying, choosing, and committing to actually has value. And yes, this can be an incredibly productive transit, but it can also show us where we've been mentally scattered, too impatient, or too quick to move without a real plan. Mercury in Taurus helps us slow down long enough to ask, is this sustainable? Is this worth my energy? Is this actually aligned with what I value? This transit is going to hit everyone a little differently, depending on what part of your life Taurus rules. So let's break it down sign by sign, back-end index pointing down. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Aries Rising. Mercury enters Taurus and shifts attention toward the second house, bringing the mind onto money, priorities, self-worth, possessions, and the practical choices that shape everyday stability. The tone changes here. Things get quieter, steadier, and far less interested in rushing for the sake of movement. This is not flashy energy. It is useful, grounded, and very honest. The usual urge to move first and sort it out later does not get much support under this sky. Thought becomes slower, but in a way that helps. There is less appetite for chaos, weak plans, or decisions made in the heat of the moment. What starts to matter now is whether something can hold up in real life, whether it makes sense, whether it is worth the time, the effort, the money, or the emotional cost. That is the real story of this period. The spotlight turns toward resources in every form. Income, spending, savings, bills, rates, purchases, work arrangements, and habits around security can all become louder in the mind. Not because something is wrong, necessarily, but because the need for order gets stronger. Loose ends become harder to ignore. Waste becomes easier to spot. The little choices that once slipped by unnoticed can suddenly feel very obvious. That can be a gift. There is real support here for getting organized, making smarter financial decisions, cleaning up messy patterns, and becoming more selective about where energy goes. A budget can start feeling less like a punishment and more like peace. A practical conversation can do more good than a dramatic one. Small improvements made now can have lasting effects later. And this is not only about cash. The second house also speaks to worth on a deeper level. What feels fair? What feels solid? What deserves care? What gets accepted out of habit, even when it no longer feels right? Mercury moving through this part of the chart can bring a sharper awareness around that inner dialogue. Not only how money is handled, but how personal value is understood. That is where this can get powerful. Because once the mind starts asking better questions, everything changes. What is draining too much? What is giving almost nothing back? What has been tolerated for too long? Where has there been effort without proper return? This energy wants real answers. It is not interested in fantasy pricing, fake loyalty, or doing emotional gymnastics to justify what clearly is not working. It wants the truth in plain language. It wants to know what is sustainable. It wants to know where the leaks are. It wants to know what can actually be built. There may also be stronger attention on work skills, talents, side income, and the practical use of what is already available. This can be an excellent time for looking at what has value in concrete terms. A skill that has been overlooked may start to look profitable. A neglected responsibility may need to be handled properly. An overdue conversation around payment, expectations, or fairness may finally happen. And interestingly, the voice itself can change during this period. Speech may come across with more weight, more calm, and more intention. Less blurting, less reacting just to fill silence, less racing ahead of the thought. Words can land better now because there is more substance behind them. What is said may be simple, but it carries more authority precisely because it is not trying so hard. That is part of the lesson here. Not every message needs extra decoration. Not every opinion needs immediate expression. Not every opportunity deserves an instant yes. There is strength in restraint. There is wisdom in taking a beat. There is clarity in saying exactly what needs to be said and leaving the rest alone. This period can also expose old habits around spending for comfort, proving something through possessions, or holding on to situations that no longer feel good simply because they feel familiar. Taurus likes consistency, but consistency is not always healthy. Familiarity is not always safety. What has become routine is not automatically right. That is where the challenge comes in. Once the mind settles on a position, it may not want to move. An idea can harden into a stance. A preference can become a rule. A plan can turn rigid just when flexibility would help most. So the growth point here is learning the difference between being grounded and being stuck. Those are not the same thing. Grounded means thoughtful, present, and rooted in reality. Stuck means unwilling to adjust, even when the facts have changed. That distinction matters. Still, overall, this is a strong influence for rebuilding trust in personal judgment. It can help create better boundaries, cleaner priorities, and a more mature relationship with what is being exchanged in every area of life. Not only money, but time. Not only time, but attention. Not only attention, but effort. Every investment starts to mean more. That can bring a real shift in attitude. Less chasing, less proving, less giving away energy just because something feels urgent. In its place comes steadiness, discernment, patience, a quieter kind of confidence. And that confidence is important because it does not need to perform. It does not need applause. It does not need constant reassurance. It simply knows what has substance and what does not. That is the beauty of Mercury in Taurus through this part of the chart. It clears out mental clutter. It sharpens practical thinking. It helps decisions come from self-respect rather than pressure. By the end of this passage, the biggest realization may be this. Not everything deserves access, not everything deserves effort, and not everything deserves a discount. That includes money. That includes time. That includes personal standards. The real work here is simple, even if it is not always easy. Get clear, get honest, get solid, and let that be enough. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Aries Rising. Mercury moves into the first house here. So the mind comes back to the self, the body, the voice, the direction life is taking, and the way thoughts are being carried out into the world. There is more presence in this transit, more awareness, more attention on image, choices, personal plans, and the message being sent without even trying. This can feel clarifying. After periods that may have felt noisy, distracted, or mentally scattered, this influence brings things back into focus. Not in a dramatic sweep, more like a slow return to center. Thoughts become easier to hold onto. Opinions settle. Decisions start coming from a steadier place. There is less interest in reacting just to react, and more interest in moving with intention. That matters because when Mercury passes through the first house, the voice gets louder. Not always louder in volume, but louder in impact. What is said carries more visibility. What is chosen becomes easier for others to notice. The mind and identity start traveling together, which means conversations, plans, and personal expression become a major theme. This can look like saying what needs to be said after sitting with it for a while. It can look like speaking more plainly. It can look like becoming a little less available for confusion, mixed messages, or rushed explanations. There is something refreshing about that. This transit supports clear self-definition, a stronger sense of what feels right. a more grounded relationship with personal instincts, not the impulsive kind that leaps before looking, but the quieter kind that knows when something fits and when it absolutely does not. That can be powerful, because there is often a big difference between having thoughts and trusting them. Mercury here helps close that gap. It can bring more confidence in decision-making, more consistency in how ideas are expressed, and more comfort taking up space in conversations that once felt draining or uncertain. This is also a period where appearance, presentation, and tone may start to matter more than usual, not from vanity alone, but from the desire to feel aligned. The outer expression wants to match the inner truth. That may show up through speech, style, body language, or the way certain plans are introduced. There's more thought around how things come across and whether they actually reflect what is real. That can lead to useful adjustments. A habit may change. A look may shift. A message may get refined. A personal goal may finally become concrete instead of staying vague. The first house does not like staying abstract for too long. It wants embodiment. It wants action that feels connected to identity. And with Taurus holding the reins, that action tends to be slow, measured, and purposeful. There is also something deeply practical about this stretch. The mind can become more selective with energy, less interested in entertaining every opinion, less willing to explain the same thing 10 different ways, less likely to jump every time life makes noise. A little more stillness enters the system, and from that stillness comes better judgment. That is one of the underrated gifts of this placement. It helps thoughts mature before they leave the mouth. It helps ideas take root before they are announced. It helps plans become tangible instead of staying trapped in endless mental motion. And for a sign that can sometimes get stuck carrying more than necessary, that kind of simplicity can feel like relief. Still, this is not a transit without its complications. Mercury in Taurus can become stubborn, especially in the first house where opinions can feel personal very quickly. Once the mind decides something, changing direction may feel irritating, unnecessary, or even threatening. A harmless disagreement can feel more loaded than it really is. Advice may land poorly if it feels like pressure. There can also be a tendency to dig into one viewpoint simply because it feels safer than opening the door to change. That is worth watching. The lesson is not to become unshakable for the sake of pride. The lesson is to become solid without becoming rigid. There is a difference. Solid means rooted. Rigid means trapped. And during this period, that line may become very clear. This can also be a time when life asks for a stronger relationship with patience. Mercury here does not rush the answer. It takes its time. It wants to observe, sense, consider, and move only when the ground feels reliable. That can be frustrating in a world that rewards speed, but it often leads to better outcomes. There is wisdom in waiting long enough to know what is real. That wisdom is available now. Conversations can become more direct, but also more thoughtful. Personal choices can become simpler, but more aligned. Mental energy may stop scattering in 10 directions and start gathering around what actually matters. That alone can change the tone of daily life. There may also be a renewed desire to trust the body more. The first house is physical, and Mercury passing through it can sharpen awareness of signals that were easy to brush off before. Energy levels, stress, rest, routine, voice, and the effect of environment on the nervous system may all feel more noticeable. The mind may not want endless stimulation right now. It may want quiet, comfort, and enough space to hear itself think. That is not laziness. That is intelligence. Because clarity rarely arrives in the middle of constant noise. Overall, this is a transit that helps bring thought and identity into better agreement. It supports clearer expression, steadier choices, and a stronger sense of personal direction. It can make communication more effective simply by making it more honest. No extra performance. No unnecessary complexity. Just a deeper connection to what feels true and worth standing on. By the end of this passage, the shift may be easy to recognize. Less over-explaining, less second-guessing, less giving power to outside noise. In its place comes calm, precision, a stronger voice, a clearer sense of self. That is the value of this moment. Not speed, not spectacle, not trying to keep up with everyone else. Just truth that feels grounded enough to live by. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Gemini Rising. Mercury enters Taurus and moves through the 12th house, drawing attention inward and lowering the volume on the outside world. This is a quieter stretch, more reflective, more private, more layered. The mind does not want constant stimulation here. It wants space. It wants silence. It wants a chance to sort through everything that has been left half felt, half finished, or pushed aside because life kept moving too fast. This transit can feel subtle at first. Nothing about it screams for attention. It does not arrive with a big entrance. It works behind the scenes through instinct, memory, dreams, mood, inner conversations, and those strange moments when something suddenly clicks without needing a long explanation. That is why this period can feel unusual. The answers may not come through logic alone. They may come through rest, solitude, timing, and paying attention to what keeps repeating below the surface. That is where the real work is happening. Mercury usually likes motion, information, interaction, and staying mentally plugged in. But in this part of the chart, the current turns inward. Thoughts get slower. The need to explain everything weakens. There can be a stronger pull toward privacy, retreat, and stepping back from noise that no longer feels useful. That can be deeply restorative. This is the kind of transit that helps clear mental clutter that has been building for too long. Old worries can rise up to be processed. Forgotten feelings can return for closure. Certain patterns may become impossible to ignore, especially the ones that keep running quietly in the background and shaping behavior without asking permission. This is where greater awareness begins, not through overthinking, not through collecting more opinions, not through rushing toward the next distraction. Through stillness. There is support here for pulling back from people, conversations, or environments that feel mentally exhausting. It becomes easier to notice what drains the nervous system, what scrambles concentration, and what leaves a heavy feeling that lingers long after the interaction is over. Energy management becomes important now in a very real way, because Mercury in the 12th can also reveal where too much has been carried in silence. Thoughts that never got spoken. Frustrations that got swallowed, emotions that were analyzed instead of actually felt. This passage can bring those things closer to the surface, not to create chaos, but to clear out what has been taking up space without being addressed properly. So there may be a strong need to step away from constant input. Less doom scrolling, less pointless chatter, less trying to decode every little thing in real time. The mind benefits from softness here, more rest, more stillness, more room to let thoughts settle instead of forcing answers before they are ready. There can also be a deeper connection with dreams, intuition, symbolism, and private realizations that arrive when the world gets quiet enough to hear them. And that can bring surprising clarity. A hidden truth may come into view. A private decision may start taking shape. A lingering question may answer itself without much effort at all. Of course, there is another side to it too. This part of the chart can blur things if there is not enough grounding. Thoughts can drift. Motivation can feel inconsistent. Concentration may fade in and out. There can be moments of mental fog, over-isolation, or quietly spiraling without realizing it until much later. Worry can become strangely circular here, repeating itself without offering a solution. That is why grounding matters so much. Simple routines can help more than expected. Good sleep can change everything. Time alone can be medicine, but too much withdrawal can turn heavy. Balance is the lesson. This transit is not asking for complete disappearance. It is asking for discernment, for knowing when to pull back and when to reconnect, for recognizing that not every thought deserves full belief, and not every feeling needs immediate action. Some things just need to be witnessed before they can be released. This is also a beautiful transit for anything done in private. Writing behind the scenes, planning quietly, researching without announcing it, letting something develop away from outside commentary. Not everything needs an audience while it is forming. In fact, this stretch may work best when certain thoughts, plans, or transitions are allowed to stay protected for a little while longer. There is wisdom in not revealing everything too early. Mercury moving through this house often marks a period of mental closure before a new chapter begins. The mind is finishing something, even if the outer world has not caught up yet. There is an ending quality to it. Not necessarily sad, just necessary. A chapter may be wrapping up internally before the next one gets named out loud. That is why there may be less interest in explaining every move. The truth is still settling. The words are still forming. The meaning is still becoming clear. And that is completely fine. Overall, this is a deeply useful influence for clearing mental residue, reconnecting with inner truth, and stepping away from the kind of noise that weakens judgment. It can bring insight, emotional honesty, and a more peaceful relationship with the inner world. The shift here is gentle but real. Less mental clutter, less forced certainty, less giving every outside voice so much power. In its place comes reflection, relief, a quieter kind of wisdom. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Cancer Rising. Mercury moves into Taurus and begins working through the 11th house, bringing attention to friendships, community, future plans, collaboration, support systems, and the bigger picture that life is trying to build toward. The mind starts looking ahead, not in a rushed, anxious way, more like a steady scan of what is growing, what is fading, and who actually belongs in the next chapter. This part of the chart has a lot to do with connection, not surface level contact, real alignment, shared values, mutual support, the kind of relationships that help a person move forward instead of keeping everything stuck in old emotional loops. With Mercury passing through Taurus here, there can be more thought around who feels solid, who feels inconsistent, and which conversations have real substance behind them. That can be revealing. Some people may start to feel easier to trust. Some may begin to feel harder to relate to. A few connections may suddenly show their value very clearly. And that matters because this house is not only about friendship. It is also about vision, the goals that live out in the distance, the things that require time, patience, and the right people around them in order to become real. Mercury in Taurus helps slow those plans down just enough to make them stronger. Instead of trying to do everything at once, there is more interest in choosing what feels sustainable and building from there. That is where this becomes useful. Ideas for the future can take on a more concrete shape. Something that felt vague before may finally become actionable. A long-term plan may need structure. A creative project may need consistency. A group effort may need better communication, clearer expectations, or a more grounded approach. This is less about dreaming for the sake of dreaming and more about asking what can actually be developed over time. That shift can be powerful. There may also be more activity involving social media audiences, professional networks, group chats, events, collaborations, or circles built around shared goals. Conversations in these areas can carry more weight right now. Who gets a reply? Who does not? Which invitations feel meaningful? Which spaces feel draining? A lot can become clear simply by paying attention to where energy naturally wants to go and where it starts pulling back. That instinct is worth trusting because Mercury in this house can sharpen awareness around social dynamics in a grounded way. It becomes easier to notice who is reliable, who only appears when convenient, and which connections feel rooted in something genuine. There may be less tolerance for one-sided effort, flaky energy, or people who take up too much space without bringing much back. That is not cold. That is discernment. This passage can also bring focus to hopes that have been sitting quietly in the background, goals that were postponed, plans that got buried under daily demands, wishes that felt too far away to take seriously. Mercury in Taurus has a way of making those things feel less abstract, not all at once, and not with fireworks, but with steadiness, with practical thought, with the kind of mindset that says, this may take time, but it can be done. That kind of energy is deeply helpful here, because this house thrives when vision is paired with consistency. It does not need constant excitement. It needs direction, a plan, a reason to keep showing up. Mercury in Taurus supports exactly that. It helps organize what matters, trim what does not, and turn vague momentum into something more dependable. At the same time, this area of life can reveal tension if expectations have been quietly piling up. A friendship may need honesty. A group situation may need boundaries. A future plan may need revision. A certain dream may no longer fit the person carrying it. That can be uncomfortable, but also freeing. Sometimes growth means realizing that the old goal was built for an older version of the self. Sometimes it means accepting that a social space no longer feels nourishing. Sometimes it means recognizing that there has been too much effort going into people who only know how to keep things casual, inconsistent, or half-formed. Mercury in Taurus wants something real. It wants loyalty. It wants consistency. It wants conversations that can actually lead somewhere. There is also a creative side to this placement. So this can be a productive period for shaping ideas that involve teaching, sharing, building an audience, creating with others, or giving form to something that has social value. Some ideas are ready to be developed in a larger space, especially if the foundation is strong enough. Still, one challenge here is stubbornness around expectations. A fixed Earth Mercury can hold onto one plan, one vision, one role within a group, and resist adapting even when conditions change. That can make collaboration harder if flexibility disappears. So the lesson is not to abandon the vision, but to let it evolve when necessary. Overall, this is a helpful passage for strengthening the future, clarifying social dynamics, and making more intentional choices about community. It supports thoughtful planning, steadier collaboration, and a better understanding of which connections belong in the bigger picture. By the end of this transit, the shift may sound like this: fewer empty interactions, fewer scattered plans, fewer hopes floating around without structure. In their place comes direction, better support, a stronger sense of where life is trying to go and who is truly meant to be part of it. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Leo Rising. Mercury moves into Taurus and starts working through the 10th house, bringing the spotlight onto career, reputation, public image, ambition, leadership, and the direction life is taking in a visible way. This is not background energy. This is the part of the chart that deals with what gets noticed, what gets taken seriously, and what kind of name is being made over time. So the tone shifts here. Thoughts become more strategic. Decisions carry more weight. Conversations around work, responsibility, status, long-term goals, or authority can start taking up much more space. There's often a stronger awareness of how actions look from the outside, what kind of impression is being left behind, and whether current efforts are actually building towards something meaningful. This can be a very productive transit. Mercury in Taurus brings patience to an area of life that often runs on pressure. Instead of chasing every open door, there's more benefit in choosing carefully, moving with intention, and focusing on what can truly last. That makes this a strong period for planning, organizing, refining professional goals, and getting serious about what deserves continued energy. Not louder, smarter. This house has a lot to do with achievement, but not the shiny version that only looks good from far away. The real version, the one built through consistency, credibility, discipline, and the ability to stay with something long enough to make it solid. Mercury moving through Taurus helps with that. It slows the mind down just enough to make stronger choices. That can look like clearer thinking around career moves, business plans, contracts, leadership roles, responsibilities, deadlines, or the next major step. A long-term vision may finally start feeling real instead of distant. An idea may need structure. A public role may need a more thoughtful voice behind it. Something important may need to be handled with more maturity than usual. And that can actually work very well here. Because this transit supports authority, especially the kind that does not need to perform to prove it exists. There is something powerful about calm certainty, about speaking when there is something worth saying, about letting the work speak before the ego jumps in to narrate everything. That is part of the lesson now. This is not the time for empty hype. This is not the time for scattered effort. This is not the time for saying yes to things that look impressive but lead nowhere. What matters is substance. There may be more contact with bosses, clients, managers, authority figures, institutions, or people who hold influence in some way. Professional conversations may become more important. Expectations may become clearer. Standards may rise. In some cases, there can be more visibility around opinions, decisions, or public communication, which means words may carry farther than usual. That makes precision important. A careless comment can stick. A strong idea can open a door. A thoughtful response can shift how someone is perceived. This is one of those transits where tone matters almost as much as content. Taurus helps steady the voice, giving speech more weight, more control, and more presence. There can be less rushing to explain and more trust in saying exactly what needs to be said. That alone can change a lot. It can also become easier to see where career choices are out of alignment with actual values. A title may not feel worth the cost. A role may ask too much and give too little back. A path that once seemed appealing may start feeling dry, heavy, or disconnected from what really matters. Mercury in Taurus has a way of cutting through image and asking a simple question. Is this truly worth building? That question can clarify a great deal. Because sometimes the issue is not failure. Sometimes the issue is success built on the wrong foundation. And that is a different conversation entirely. This transit can help clean that up. It can support better planning, stronger boundaries with work, and a more honest relationship with ambition itself. Not every goal needs to be dramatic. Not every dream needs an audience. Some of the most important moves made here may be quiet, practical, and deeply effective. There is also real support for becoming more intentional about reputation. What is being known for? What message is being sent through actions, not just words? What kind of legacy is beginning to take shape through repeated choices? These questions tend to come forward now, especially if life has been asking for more responsibility lately. And with that can come a deeper desire for respect. Not applause, not attention for its own sake. Respect, the kind that is earned, the kind that lasts, the kind that comes from being dependable, capable, and clear. That is where Taurus strengthens this house. Of course, there is a shadow side too. A fixed Mercury in the 10th can become overly attached to one plan, one title, one image, or one way of doing things. Pride can make adjustment harder than it needs to be. Advice may be ignored simply because it feels uncomfortable. A decision may stay in place long after it has stopped making sense, just because changing course feels too exposed. That is worth noticing. There is a difference between commitment and stubbornness, between holding a vision and becoming trapped inside it, between building patiently and refusing to adapt. This transit asks for that distinction. Still, overall, this is a strong placement for getting serious in the right way. It helps steady the mind around big decisions. It supports practical ambition. It brings more control to public communication and more wisdom to long-term planning. It can also help separate what is performative from what is genuinely valuable. By the end of this passage, the shift may sound something like this. Less chasing status for appearances. Less wasted effort on weak opportunities. Less talking just to fill the room. In its place comes focus, competence, a stronger public voice, a clearer path towards something that can actually hold weight. That is the gift of this transit. Not speed, not spectacle, real traction. And if this resonated, don't forget to subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Virgo Rising. Mercury enters Taurus and begins moving through the 9th house, opening up the mental landscape and pulling attention toward meaning, perspective, learning, travel, belief systems, teaching, publishing, and the bigger story that everything is trying to point toward. The usual focus on errands, details, and what needs fixing starts lifting a little. The mind wants range now. Room to think. Room to question. Room to look past the immediate situation and ask what it all adds up to. That can feel refreshing, especially after periods where life has been asking for nonstop problem solving. This brings in a wider lens. There may be more interest in studying something properly, revisiting a spiritual idea, planning a trip, exploring a new philosophy, or finding language for something that has been felt for a long time but never fully named. Instead of getting lost in the tiny pieces, there is more support for stepping back and seeing the pattern. That shift can change a lot. The ninth house is where the mind goes when it wants truth, not just information, not random facts, not endless opinions, something fuller than that, something that offers direction. Mercury in Taurus helps by slowing the process down and making it more grounded. There is less interest in chasing every theory and more desire to stay with what feels useful, steady, and real. That works well here. A belief may deepen. A plan for the future may get clearer. A long-term vision may stop feeling abstract and start becoming something that can actually be built. This can also be a strong period for writing, speaking, teaching, learning, or sharing ideas in a way that feels more mature and more rooted. Words may carry a little more authority now, not because they are louder, but because they are backed by experience, patience, and real thought. There can be less temptation to over-explain and more trust in saying something simple that actually lands. That is part of the power here. Mercury rules this chart, so when it moves through a place like this, the mental tone becomes especially important. Thoughts want meaning. Conversations want depth. The usual habit of analyzing every moving part can loosen just enough to make space for wisdom instead of just data. And there is a difference. Data collects. Wisdom connects. That may be the lesson. There may also be more focus on travel plans, education, certifications, legal matters, publishing projects, content creation, or anything involving a message that reaches farther than the everyday circle. Something may need structure. A decision may need patience. A larger goal may require commitment instead of constant revision. Taurus helps stabilize that process. It does not rush the answer. It sits with it until the answer feels solid. That can be useful for a mind that does not always know when to stop refining. Sometimes the right move is not finding a better option. Sometimes it is trusting the one that already makes sense. This placement can help with that. It can also bring a deeper relationship with faith, though not always in a traditional way. Faith here may look like trusting a path before every detail is visible. Trusting growth that is happening slowly. Trusting that not everything meaningful can be measured in neat little pieces right away. For a sign that often feels safer when everything is categorized and under control, that can be an important shift. There is something calming about letting life be a little bigger than the checklist. At the same time, this part of the chart can stir up strong opinions. Mercury in Taurus does not change its mind just because someone else speaks with confidence. Once a belief settles in, it can become very fixed. That may show up through debates, moral standoffs, resistance to unfamiliar perspectives, or becoming so attached to one truth that there is no room left for nuance. That is where the challenge lives, because conviction is useful. Rigidity is not. A steady worldview can guide a person beautifully. A frozen one can block growth without even realizing it. So the work here is to stay grounded without becoming immovable. To let belief support life, not harden around it. To listen without feeling threatened. To keep learning without assuming the lesson is already complete. That matters now. This can also be an excellent period for choosing substance over noise in what gets consumed mentally. Better books, better conversations, better questions, less scattered information with nowhere to land, less attention given to chatter that adds nothing. The mind may become pickier, and honestly, that may be a good thing. Not everything deserves a seat at the table. There is a cleaner appetite here. For what is nourishing, for what stretches the mind without draining it, for what offers direction instead of confusion. That may also influence the kind of people or spaces that feel appealing. There can be a stronger pull toward those who have perspective, integrity, experience, or something worthwhile to teach. Surface level talk may feel especially dull. Shallow certainty may feel even worse. What holds attention now is depth with substance behind it. And that can be inspiring. A new subject may spark real excitement. A trip may shift a perspective. A conversation may open a door that had been closed for years. Not because everything changes overnight, but because the mind becomes willing to grow in a steadier, more grounded way. Overall, Mercury moving through this part of the chart supports broader thinking, wiser choices, and a more meaningful relationship with the future. It helps shape ideas that can guide the next chapter. It brings maturity to opinions, patience to learning, and a stronger connection to what feels true enough to live by. By the end of this passage, the shift may sound like this: less mental clutter dressed up as knowledge, less arguing just to be right, less shrinking life down to only what can be controlled. In its place comes perspective, depth, a stronger inner compass, and a clearer sense of where the road is leading. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Libra Rising. Mercury enters Taurus and begins moving through the 8th house, turning attention toward shared finances, trust, intimacy, debts, support, emotional entanglements, and the deeper exchanges that sit underneath surface level life. This is not light, breezy energy. It asks for honesty. It asks for depth. It asks for a closer look at what is being merged, what is being owed, and what is quietly shaping the emotional climate behind the scenes. The tone gets more serious here. Thoughts may linger longer. Conversations may carry more weight. There can be a stronger pull towards subjects that are usually easier to avoid, especially the ones involving control, vulnerability, money tied to someone else, or feelings that have been tucked away because they seem too complicated to sort through properly. That is where this passage starts doing real work. The 8th house deals with what is shared, and that can mean a lot of things. Joint finances, taxes, loans, investments, business arrangements, emotional bonds, secrets, promises, power dynamics, the invisible contracts that exist between people, whether they are spoken out loud or not. Mercury in Taurus brings steadiness to all of that. It helps slow things down enough to actually understand what is going on beneath the surface. And that can be very useful, because this part of the chart often deals with situations that are emotionally loaded, financially messy, or both. When Mercury moves through Taurus here, there is more potential for practical thinking around matters that usually feel harder to define. A financial conversation may need to happen. A truth may need to be named. A boundary may need to become clearer. A private issue may finally require direct language instead of hints, avoidance, or reading between the lines. That kind of clarity can change everything, especially in a house like this, where so much can stay buried for too long. There may be more focus on what is being shared fairly and what is not. Who is contributing? Who is withholding? Where trust feels solid? Where it feels strained? Where emotional labor has been uneven? Where money has become tangled with expectation, guilt, or obligation? Mercury in Taurus does not want to leave those things floating in the background. It wants to define them. It wants to make them real enough to deal with. That may not be glamorous, but it is necessary. This placement can also bring a more thoughtful approach to emotional intimacy. Not the performative version, the real version, the kind that requires honesty, maturity, and a willingness to say what is actually felt instead of smoothing everything over to keep things comfortable. There may be less tolerance for vague dynamics, half-truths, mixed signals, or emotional arrangements that only work because nobody is saying the quiet part out loud. That is important, because this energy has no interest in pretending something is balanced when it clearly is not. It wants substance. It wants sincerity. It wants to know whether a bond can hold weight or whether it has only been surviving through avoidance. That can be revealing. Some connections may grow stronger through honest conversation. Others may start showing their cracks. An unresolved issue may return because it is finally ready to be handled properly. A financial concern may need structure. A private fear may need language. A pattern around control, dependence, or mistrust may become too obvious to ignore. And that is not a bad thing. Awareness may feel intense, but it is often the beginning of freedom. There is also something deeply perceptive about Mercury moving through this part of the chart. The mind can become more observant, more strategic, more tuned into subtext. It may become easier to notice what is not being said, what someone is avoiding, or where the real issue lives beneath the polished version of events. That can make this a strong period for research, therapy, financial planning, private investigation, emotional processing, or any kind of work that requires patience and depth. Nothing here wants to stay superficial. That is part of the gift. This is a good stretch for getting serious about shared money matters, cleaning up financial loose ends, reviewing agreements, or being more intentional with anything that involves trust and exchange. It can also help bring steadiness to emotional territory that has felt chaotic. Taurus does not want drama for the sake of drama. It wants something stable enough to build on, even in areas that tend to feel complicated. Still, this house always has a shadow side. Mercury in Taurus can hold on tightly to a story, to a hurt, to a suspicion, to an old emotional position that once felt protective but no longer makes sense. In the 8th house, that can turn into silent resentment, fear of opening up, possessiveness, or a refusal to revisit something because it feels too exposing. Once the mind settles on a conclusion, it may not want to move. That is where growth is needed, because emotional depth is not the same as emotional heaviness. Privacy is not the same as secrecy. Protection is not the same as control. Those distinctions matter now. This passage asks for courage, but not the loud kind. The quieter kind. The kind that tells the truth without turning it into a weapon. The kind that admits what feels vulnerable without collapsing into it. The kind that can say, this is what is mine, this is what is shared, and this is what needs to change. That can be incredibly powerful. There may also be a stronger awareness of energetic exchange in general. Which situations leave a person depleted? Which bonds feel grounding? Which obligations are fair? Which ones are quietly draining life force? The 8th house can be very clear about that when Mercury passes through. It does not only ask what is being given, it asks what it is costing. That question may answer a lot. Overall, this is a valuable influence for sorting out emotional and financial entanglements with more maturity and less avoidance. It supports grounded conversations, better boundaries, stronger discernment, and a deeper understanding of what trust actually requires. It can also bring relief, especially where there has been confusion, silence, or too much left unspoken for too long. By the end of this passage, the shift may sound like this: less guessing, less carrying quiet tension without naming it, less staying tangled in what should have been addressed already. In its place comes honesty, better boundaries, a clearer view of what is shared, what is owed, and what can truly be trusted. That is where the power is. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Scorpio Rising. Mercury moves into Taurus and the focus lands on the 7th house, which means attention turns toward relationships, one-on-one dynamics, commitment, agreements, conflict, compromise, and the people who act like mirrors. This part of the chart has a way of making things personal very quickly. Not because everything becomes dramatic, but because partnership always reveals something. Preferences, patterns, expectations, weak spots, needs that were never fully spoken. So, the mind starts circling those areas. Conversations with a partner, an ex, a close friend, a client, or anyone playing a major role can suddenly matter a lot more. Tone matters. Timing matters. What gets said matters. What stays unsaid matters even more. Mercury in Taurus does not skim the surface here. It slows things down enough to notice where a connection feels steady, where it feels strained, and where somebody has been smiling through something that actually needs a real discussion. That can be uncomfortable, but useful, because this is not airy, casual relationship energy. It is more grounded than that, more concerned with consistency, more interested in whether something can hold weight in the real world. Sweet words are nice, but this passage asks a harder question. Is there follow-through? Is there reliability? Is there something solid underneath the chemistry, the history, or the habit? That question clears a lot up. Some bonds may feel more dependable now. Others may start showing where the cracks have been hiding. If a relationship has been running on assumptions, mixed messages, or emotional guesswork, this Mercury transit has a way of dragging things into plain sight. And honestly, that may be overdue. There is also a practical side to this. The 7th house is not only romance. It also covers contracts, negotiations, collaborations, and the kinds of one-on-one arrangements that require mutual effort. So this can be a strong period for setting terms, revisiting expectations, handling paperwork, clarifying commitments, or finally defining something that has been hovering in that vague, almost but not quite space. And Taurus helps with that. It brings patience into the conversation. It brings steadiness into decision-making. It brings a stronger instinct for what feels safe, fair, and worth investing in. For Scorpio Rising, that matters more than most people realize. There is often a strong radar for what is hidden, what is off, what is emotionally loaded. But this influence asks for something simpler. Less decoding, less reading between the lines, more directness, more plain language, more honesty about what is actually needed from the people closest. That is where the growth begins. Because not every issue needs to become a mystery. Not every silence is meaningful. Not every test proves anything useful. Sometimes the healthiest move is the most obvious one. Say what the issue is, ask the real question, and listen to the answer without trying to control what comes next. That may be one of the biggest lessons here. Mercury moving through Taurus can make communication slower, but it can also make it stronger. Reactions lose some of their heat. Words become more measured. There is more power in keeping things simple instead of loading every sentence with emotional history. A calm truth can do far more now than a dramatic confrontation ever could. That shift may improve a lot. A misunderstanding may finally get cleared up. A difficult conversation may go better than expected. A relationship may become more stable simply because both people stop dancing around the obvious. And if something cannot survive a straightforward conversation, that says something too. This period may also highlight the difference between loyalty and attachment. Taurus values commitment, but sometimes commitment turns into staying too long out of comfort, fear, or sheer resistance to change. That can show up in relationships that are familiar but no longer nourishing, or agreements that feel stale but keep getting dragged along because nobody wants to be the one who names it. Mercury here does not love unnecessary change, but it does respect truth. So if something has gone stagnant, there may be pressure to admit it. If a connection needs more effort, that becomes clearer. If someone has been doing all the bending while the other person stays comfortable, that imbalance may stop being easy to ignore. That is not negativity. That is information. And information is useful. There is also something beautiful about this placement when the bond is healthy. It can deepen trust through practical care. It can bring more thoughtful communication, more emotional steadiness, more meaningful effort, and a greater willingness to build something that lasts. Not flashy, not performative, just real. The kind of closeness that grows through consistency, patience, and a genuine desire to meet each other halfway. That kind of energy can strengthen a relationship considerably. Still, the shadow side is worth watching. Taurus can dig in its heels, and in the 7th house that can turn into stalemates. Two people waiting for the other one to move first. A refusal to budge just because pride got involved. Replaying the same argument from the same angle with slightly different wording and calling it progress. The fixed quality here can make people loyal, but it can also make them exhausting when nobody wants to soften. That is where flexibility becomes essential. Not weakness, not surrender, just enough openness to let the conversation breathe. Because compromise is part of the medicine here. Not the kind that erases personal needs, but the kind that makes room for another person to exist without turning every difference into a threat. That is especially important now, since the 7th house never deals with relationship in theory. It deals with relationship in practice, in habits, in choices, in the little moments that show whether respect is actually present. So this stretch can be very revealing. It shows what feels secure. It shows what needs work. It shows whether the partnership is built on something real or just held together by routine and avoidance. Overall, Mercury in Taurus through this part of the chart helps bring maturity to relationship matters. It supports better conversations, clearer agreements, stronger boundaries, and a more realistic understanding of what partnership requires. There is less room for fantasy here, but that is not a loss. In many cases, it is a relief. By the end of this passage, the shift may feel like this: less guessing what someone meant, less dragging around unresolved tension, less mistaking intensity for stability. In its place comes clarity, steadier connection, a more grounded way of relating, and a sharper sense of who is truly willing to meet in the middle. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Sagittarius Rising. Mercury enters Taurus and starts moving through the sixth house, shifting attention toward work, routines, time management, health, habits, responsibilities, and the small decisions that quietly run everyday life. This is the part of the chart that deals with what gets repeated, maintained, adjusted, cleaned up, and handled properly. Not glamorous, but incredibly important. So the mood changes here. The mind gets more practical, more observant, more aware of what is functioning well and what keeps creating unnecessary stress. Instead of living in the future or chasing the next big idea, attention comes back to the daily structure holding everything together. And that can be very useful because when this area gets ignored, life starts feeling messy in ways that are hard to explain. This transit helps sort that out. There can be more focus on schedules, workload, productivity, organization, physical well-being, and the little systems that either support peace or slowly destroy it. A habit may need adjusting. A routine may need more consistency. A work situation may need better boundaries. Something that once felt manageable may start showing signs of strain simply because too much has been piled onto it without enough care. That is where this placement starts earning its value. Mercury in Taurus does not want chaos dressed up as freedom. It wants steadiness. It wants rhythm. It wants a way of living that does not constantly burn through energy for no reason. That can be a meaningful correction for a chart that often prefers momentum, possibility, and wide open space over small repetitive tasks. During this period, the details matter because the details are shaping the experience. That realization may land hard. Not everything needs to be dramatic to be important. Not everything needs to be exciting to deserve attention. Sometimes the biggest improvement comes from fixing what happens every single day. That is the medicine here. This can be an excellent stretch for getting more realistic about workload, deadlines, and how energy is being used. There may be a need to simplify, to stop overcommitting, to handle one thing at a time instead of scattering effort across 10 directions and hoping it somehow works out. Taurus helps slow the pace enough to notice what actually gets results and what just creates fatigue. That can change a lot. A more grounded routine may start taking shape. A better relationship with rest may become necessary. The body may start speaking louder if it has been ignored. And that piece matters more than usual. The sixth house is strongly tied to health, not only in a medical sense, but in the basic everyday sense. Sleep, nourishment, stress, pace, movement, digestion, focus, mental overload, and the link between physical strain and emotional pressure can all become more noticeable now. Mercury moving through Taurus may bring a stronger awareness of how much daily choices affect the nervous system. That awareness can be clarifying. If the mind has been overloaded, the body may show it. If the routine has no structure, concentration may suffer. If too many things have been tolerated out of convenience, the cost may become harder to ignore. This is not meant to punish. It is meant to reveal. Because once the pattern is visible, it can be changed. There may also be more thinking around job matters, coworkers, tasks, logistics, paperwork, scheduling, admin work, service roles, or the everyday mechanics that keep life moving. Conversations in these areas can become more important. Expectations may need to be clarified. Standards may need to be reset. A better system may need to replace one that has clearly outlived its usefulness. That does not sound thrilling, but it can be deeply satisfying. There is a special kind of peace that comes from getting life into better order. Not perfect, not rigid, just cleaner, more manageable, less wasteful. Mercury in Taurus can help create that by bringing patience to things that usually get rushed through, ignored, or handled half-heartedly. It helps the mind stay with the task long enough to improve it. It encourages follow-through. It supports practical decision-making. It also helps separate what is urgent from what only feels urgent because everything has been piled together. That distinction is worth a lot. This transit can also reveal where work has become too draining, too repetitive, or too disconnected from any real sense of value. A daily obligation may start feeling heavier than usual if it no longer makes sense. A job dynamic may need more respect. An environment may feel too noisy, too demanding, or too inconsistent to keep pretending it is fine. Taurus is not interested in endless hustle with nothing stable to show for it. So there may be a stronger desire for reliability, clear expectations, steady results, useful effort, work that at least feels worth the energy it takes. That instinct is important because the sixth house is not only about what gets done. It is about how life is being lived while those things are getting done. And Mercury here wants to improve that experience. It wants less friction, less waste, less self-created stress, less pretending that burnout is normal just because it has become familiar. That could be one of the deeper lessons of this transit. Efficiency is not about squeezing more into every hour. It is about making life function better. It is about removing what keeps draining energy without giving enough back. Of course, there is a challenge here too. Taurus can become fixed in routine, and in the sixth house that can turn into clinging to habits simply because they are familiar. A system may stop working, but still remain in place. A schedule may be too packed, yet keep repeating. A job pattern may feel stale, but changing it may seem more annoying than enduring it. That is where this transit can get a little stubborn. So flexibility still matters. Not chaos, not constant reinvention, just enough willingness to adjust when something clearly needs improvement. That is the sweet spot. Overall, Mercury in Taurus through this part of the chart supports better organization, healthier habits, smarter pacing, and more respect for the daily structure that supports everything else. It helps bring order where life has become noisy. It helps sharpen judgment around work and well-being. It also reminds the mind that the quality of a life is often hiding inside the ordinary things that happen over and over again. By the end of this transit, the shift may feel like this. Less rushing through the day on autopilot. Less letting stress pile up without a plan. Less wasting energy on systems that do not serve anything. In its place comes steadiness, better rhythm, clearer priorities, and a stronger foundation under everyday life. That is the gift of this passage. Nothing flashy, nothing forced, just a life that works better because the details are finally being handled with care. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Capricorn Rising. With Mercury moving through Taurus, attention turns toward the fifth house, lighting up romance, creativity, pleasure, self-expression, joy, and the parts of life that want to feel alive again. The mental focus shifts away from pure obligation and starts leaning toward what feels good, what feels natural, and what deserves room to grow. There is something softer about this passage. Not careless, not unserious, just warmer. The mind is less interested in grinding through whatever feels dry and far more interested in what brings color back into the day. A creative idea may start asking for structure. A romantic situation may become easier to understand. A forgotten talent may want attention again. Even the way thoughts move can feel a little less heavy here. Like life is finally making space for enjoyment instead of treating it like a reward that has to be earned after exhaustion. That shift matters, because for this chart, it can be easy to live in constant duty mode. Always thinking ahead. Always carrying responsibility. Always measuring the next step by usefulness, outcome, and long-term consequence. Mercury in Taurus moving through the fifth house interrupts that rhythm a little. It reminds the mind that delight has value too. Play has value. Desire has value. Art, beauty, laughter, affection, attraction, and simple enjoyment all have something to teach. And sometimes they teach more than pressure ever could. This can be a lovely period for creative work, especially anything that needs patience, consistency, and a steady hand. Writing, design, music, content, performance, storytelling, craft, branding, decorating, and projects that require taste or style can all benefit from this placement. Inspiration may not arrive in a chaotic burst. It may build gradually, quietly, like something taking root instead of trying to explode onto the scene. That tends to work well. The fifth house does not only govern creativity. It also speaks to romance, flirtation, attraction, dating, chemistry, and the kind of connection that wakes something up inside. Mercury here can bring conversations in love into sharper focus. Messages may matter more. Intentions become easier to read. A romantic dynamic may start feeling steadier, sweeter, or at least clearer. Someone may finally say what has been sitting in the air for a while. Or, just as important, silence may start saying enough on its own. Taurus has no patience for games that go nowhere. So if something is real, it can start feeling more grounded now. If it is all charm and no consistency, that may become obvious too. There is a stronger instinct for substance in matters of the heart. Not just attraction for attraction's sake, but interest in what can actually grow, what feels safe to trust, and what is worth opening up to. That can bring a different kind of clarity. Not cold, not cynical, just honest. This house also relates to confidence, and that may be one of the bigger themes under this transit. The voice can become more comfortable expressing personal taste, personal feelings, and personal perspective without needing constant approval. There may be less hiding behind what is practical and a little more willingness to stand behind what is genuinely enjoyed. That may sound small, but it is not. Creative confidence often begins right there, in the choice to stop apologizing for what feels natural. And that can change the whole tone of things. Pleasure may need to be taken seriously now. Not in a stiff way, in a grounded way. What feels nourishing? What brings real enjoyment? What keeps getting pushed aside, even though it clearly matters? Where has life become all output and no spark? Mercury in Taurus asks those questions through experience, through craving beauty, through wanting better conversations, better quality, better connection, better use of time. It does not want empty entertainment. It wants something satisfying, something textured, something that actually lands. That can also show up through children, family joy, celebrations, hobbies, passion projects, and moments that pull attention back to the present instead of keeping everything locked in strategy mode. Sometimes this house simply wants life to stop feeling like a task list for a minute. Sometimes it wants laughter in the room again. Sometimes it wants beauty without needing to justify it. There is wisdom in that. Of course, there is another side to this energy. A fixed Earth Mercury in the fifth can get attached to a romantic idea, to a creative method, to a certain response from someone, to the way something is supposed to unfold. If expectations harden too much, disappointment can follow. If pride gets tangled up in being desired, admired, chosen, or validated, things can start feeling heavier than they need to. So the lesson here is to stay present with what is unfolding, not cling too tightly to the script. Let the feeling breathe. Let the art develop. Let the connection reveal itself. Not everything needs to be forced into certainty right away. There can also be a tendency to hold back expression until it feels polished, safe, or guaranteed to be received well. But the fifth house thrives on risk in a healthy sense, not recklessness. Expression, the willingness to create, to flirt, to try, to enjoy, to be seen a little more fully. Mercury in Taurus supports that when it is rooted in self-respect rather than fear of rejection. That is where the sweet spot lives. Overall, this passage brings steadiness to romance, shape to creativity, and a stronger relationship with joy. It helps thoughts move toward what is nourishing instead of staying trapped in constant pressure. It supports heartfelt conversations, meaningful pleasure, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing what feels good and no longer treating that like an afterthought. By the end of this transit, the shift may feel like this: less emotional flatness, less overthinking every spark of desire, less acting like enjoyment has to be postponed forever. In its place comes warmth, expression, a little romance, a little beauty, a stronger pulse running through everyday life. And that is good medicine. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Aquarius Rising. Mercury moves into Taurus and settles into the fourth house, bringing the mind closer to home, family, roots, memory, private life, and the emotional foundation underneath everything else. The attention shifts away from the outer world a little and starts circling what feels safe, what feels familiar, and what no longer feels as settled as it once did. This is a more inward stretch, not hidden in a heavy way, just closer to the core. There can be more thought around living situations, family conversations, household routines, personal history, or the question of what true stability actually looks like now. Sometimes this kind of transit shows up through practical matters, repairs, paperwork, moving plans, home decisions, property concerns, a change in the family rhythm. Other times it lands more quietly, through reflection, memory, and the realization that something deeper needs attention. Because the fourth house is rarely only about the physical home. It is also about the inner one. The place inside that either feels calm or restless. The place that knows when life is too noisy. The place that remembers everything, even when the mind tries to move on quickly. Mercury in Taurus has a way of slowing the pace enough to hear what is happening there. That can be useful, especially for a chart that often spends a lot of time in the future, in big ideas, in distance, in what comes next. This transit asks for a return to the base of things, not the performance, not the public role, the foundation. What is happening behind closed doors? What kind of environment is being lived in? What emotional patterns are quietly running the show? What sense of belonging has been built, and whether it still feels solid? There may be more focus on family dynamics during this time. A conversation that has been put off may finally need to happen. Old tension may rise, not to create drama, but to be named honestly. A relative may need attention. A memory may come back with new meaning. Certain patterns from the past may start making more sense, especially the ones that shaped the way security, comfort, and closeness have been handled over the years. This transit can be very revealing in that way. It does not rush to the conclusion. It lingers. It notices. It connects the present moment to the deeper story underneath it. And once that link is seen, it becomes harder to ignore. There is also real support here for making home feel better in tangible ways. Organizing a space, simplifying the surroundings, fixing what has been broken for too long, choosing comfort more intentionally, creating a rhythm that feels steady instead of chaotic. Taurus likes peace that can be felt in the body, and in the fourth house that often begins with the environment itself. A quieter room can help. A cleaner routine can help. A more reliable emotional atmosphere can help even more. This can also be a strong passage for thinking carefully about what safety means. Not the old version, the real version, the current version, the version that matches the life being lived now instead of the one inherited from the past. Sometimes security means staying. Sometimes it means changing something that has grown stale. Sometimes it means admitting that familiar is not always the same thing as nourishing. That may be one of the deeper lessons here, because Mercury in Taurus can get very attached to what is known. In the fourth house, that can look like clinging to old family roles, repeating the same emotional script, defending a pattern simply because it has been there forever, or resisting necessary change because it feels easier to preserve the familiar than question it. But comfort and stagnation are not the same. Neither are loyalty and silence. This transit can make that distinction very clear. There may also be a stronger need for privacy now. Less appetite for constant outside noise. Less desire to explain everything in real time. More interest in keeping certain thoughts close while they settle. That instinct is not something to dismiss. The fourth house often works best when there is room to process away from outside commentary. Not every realization needs immediate airtime. Some things need quiet before they can become clear. Emotionally, this can be a grounding influence, but only if enough stillness is allowed in. If life has been nonstop, the inner world may begin speaking louder. If there has been too much avoidance, feelings may start showing up through mood, fatigue, irritability, or an urge to withdraw. That is not necessarily a problem. Sometimes it is simply a sign that the inner foundation wants maintenance, and that deserves respect. The mind may also become more sentimental during this period. Certain places, people, traditions, or memories may carry more weight. There can be a desire to reconnect with something meaningful from the past, or to understand the past in a more mature way. Not to stay stuck there, but to take what is useful and stop carrying what is not. That is the better use of this energy. Not living in old stories, rewriting the relationship to them. There is something steadying about this transit when it is handled well. It helps bring order to the inner world. It supports honest family conversations, wiser choices around home life, and a stronger sense of what actually brings peace. It can also make it easier to recognize that real stability is not built through detachment alone. Sometimes it is built through care, through presence, through tending to what has been ignored because it felt too ordinary or too close to home. By the end of this passage, the shift may feel something like this: less emotional static, less pretending the foundation is fine when it needs work, less carrying old patterns around like permanent truth. In its place comes steadiness, comfort that feels real, a clearer connection to where life begins and what it needs to feel supported from the inside out. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading. Pisces Rising. Mercury enters Taurus and starts moving through the third house, bringing attention to communication, daily life, learning, errands, local movement, conversations, writing, ideas, siblings, neighbors, and the mental rhythm running through ordinary days. This part of the chart is busy. It deals with what is said, what is noticed, what gets repeated, and how the mind handles the constant flow of little things. So the atmosphere changes here. Thoughts may become slower, but stronger. Speech can carry more weight. There's less interest in talking just to fill space and more interest in saying something that actually means something. The pace of the mind may stop bouncing around quite as much, which can be helpful, especially if life has felt scattered, noisy, or mentally overbooked. This transit brings things down to earth. It does not want 10 ideas with no direction. It wants one clear thought that can actually go somewhere. That is the gift. The third house is often where the mind gets overstimulated. Messages, plans, updates, logistics, interruptions, opinions, appointments, news, back and forth conversations, and little demands coming in from every angle. Mercury in Taurus helps sort through that traffic. It creates a steadier filter. What matters stands out more. What is pointless starts becoming easier to ignore. That alone can improve a lot. There may be more focus on practical conversations, paperwork, scheduling, study, content creation, writing, speaking, or daily decision-making. This can be a strong period for getting organized mentally, following through on plans, and handling details without turning every small task into a source of chaos. A messy schedule may need cleaning up. A conversation may need patience. A message may need to be clearer. A plan may need to be simplified so it can actually work. That kind of adjustment is useful here because this energy works best when life gets a little less cluttered. Not empty, just cleaner, more intentional, more manageable. Taurus has no interest in running around in circles. It wants direction, consistency, and enough calm to think properly. That may feel like relief. Communication can also take on a different tone during this time. More measured, more direct, less vague drifting, less saying something halfway and expecting everyone else to fill in the blanks. There can be a stronger desire for clarity, plain language, and conversations that feel grounded rather than confusing. That can help in every area of life. A misunderstanding may finally get sorted out. A good idea may become easier to explain. An important conversation may land better simply because the delivery is steadier. There is something very effective about that. This placement can also sharpen attention to the immediate environment, the neighborhood, the commute, nearby people, daily routines, and the general mental atmosphere of everyday life may start feeling more important. Small irritations may become more noticeable if the schedule is too packed or the surroundings feel chaotic. On the other hand, Little improvements can go a long way. Better timing, better boundaries, better systems, better use of energy. The third house responds well to that. It may also bring more thought around learning and skill building. Not chasing random information, but really staying with something long enough to get good at it. Reading with purpose, practicing consistently, studying something useful, developing a voice. Mercury in Taurus likes knowledge that can be applied, not just collected. It wants something tangible to come from mental effort. That can be especially productive now. There is also a personal side to this transit. The third house reflects how thoughts are shaped day by day, which means the inner dialogue matters more than usual. The tone of that inner voice, the way daily stress is handled, the stories repeated without even noticing. Mercury passing through Taurus can help make that quieter, steadier, and more supportive. Not instantly, but gradually. And that matters, because the way the mind speaks in private affects everything else. If the inner voice has been rushed, critical, distracted, or overloaded, this transit can begin to slow that cycle down. It can create more patience in the thinking process, more trust in simple answers, more willingness to pause before reacting. That may not sound dramatic, but it can completely change the quality of a day. There may also be more contact with siblings, cousins, neighbors, classmates, or people connected to everyday life in a close way. Some conversations here may be helpful. Others may reveal tension that has been lingering under the surface. Mercury in Taurus does not love unnecessary conflict, but it does prefer honesty over polite confusion. If something needs to be addressed, this transit supports doing it in a grounded, matter-of-fact way. No performance, no spiraling, just clarity. That approach tends to work well. Of course, there is a challenge here too. Taurus can get fixed, and in the third house that can show up as stubborn thinking, refusing to hear another point of view, or repeating the same mental loop long after it has stopped being useful. Once a conclusion settles in, it may be hard to shift it. An opinion can harden. A conversation can stall. A habit of thinking can start acting like permanent truth. That is where some flexibility is needed. Not every change in perspective is a threat. Not every new idea has to be rejected just because it arrived late. Sometimes the strongest mind in the room is the one that can stay grounded and still remain open. That is an important balance now. Overall, Mercury in Taurus through this part of the chart supports steadier communication, better follow-through, stronger mental focus, and a calmer relationship with the everyday noise of life. It helps organize what has become messy. It helps slow down reactions that do not need to happen so quickly. It also brings more substance into the voice, which can make conversations, writing, and decisions much more effective. By the end of this transit, the shift may feel like this. Less mental static, less talking in circles, less getting pulled in 10 directions at once. In its place comes clarity, better rhythm, a stronger voice, and a daily life that feels a little more grounded, one choice at a time. And if this resonated, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation for a more personal reading.